My name's Jason. I'm not into cryptids or anything like that. I'm just a kid trying to get by. I'm 22 and work as a skid steer operator for a small excavating outfit out of Gaylord, Michigan. Nothing worth mentioning, really. I'm here because of what happened to me out in the Pigeon River country last year, when something stepped out of the timber behind me that I still can't forget. People online would probably call it a dogman. I used to roll my eyes at that stuff. I still would, if I hadn't watched something that looked like a mutated wolf and walking on two legs come after me. I almost died that night, and I just can't get it out of my head. My therapist said that laying it all out here might help me move on, so here I am. Back then, I was living in Gaylord with a buddy from high school, renting a little two-bedroom place on the edge of town. I'd been with my girlfriend, Kelly, for about a year. She's my age, 22, works part-time at a grocery store, and does a couple of shifts a week at a bar off the highway. We're not doing drugs or drinking hard. Our idea of going out is driving around back roads, grabbing takeout, and sitting by a lake when we can. Beer, country radio, and a nice session in the back seat. That sort of stuff. That particular Sunday, we'd driven out to see some friends who live way out of town, closer to the state forest. Small get-together, nothing wild. A couple of other couples, bonfire, beer, steaks, and football on TV. I only had 2 beers because I knew I'd be driving us back, and the truck I was driving back then was an older F-150 that didn't like being pushed. I used it for work as well as everything else, and I couldn't afford to wreck it. Kelly doesn't like guns. She didn't grow up with them, and the whole subject makes her nervous. I grew up on the range with my dad and grandpa, so for me, it's just part of life. We're not exactly hunters. It was always more about hanging out and target practice. Kelly and I had argued about the gun from the get-go. In the end, I'd compromised by keeping my 9mm out of her sight. She knew it was there and didn't love it, but she'd gotten used to it as long as I didn't mess with it when she was around. That was the reason why I didn't have it on my belt when this whole thing went down. It was late by the time we left, close to 11. The air had that cold bite you get in northern Michigan when summer's done, and fall is really setting in. The wind had picked up and was pushing through the trees hard enough that you could hear the branches moving. I remember thinking I was glad I'd thrown a heavier jacket in the truck. Kelly had on a hoodie and wrapped herself up in an old blanket I kept in the back seat. We could have gone back the easy way, paved roads all the way into town, but I decided to save a few minutes and cut through on some of the back roads I knew. I've driven around out there since I got my license. Some of the forest roads turn into 2 tracks, some dead-end at gates, but if you know which ones connect, you can shave a good chunk of time off the drive. I'd been down that particular stretch enough times in daylight that it didn't bother me to run it at night. There's something about those roads after dark. No streetlights, no houses, just trees crowding in on both sides and the occasional reflector post, letting you know you're still on an actual road. Kelly had her feet up on the seat, blanket pulled up to her chin, scrolling on her phone until the signal dropped out completely. Truth is, losing signal out there is normal. I've broken down in the woods before, back when I was a teenager, and it was never a big deal. You walk until you hit a main road, or you wait for someone you know to come looking. Annoying, sure, but not life or death. That night, I wasn't thinking about anything worse than maybe having to call my boss in the morning if the truck decided to throw a fit. The first hint of trouble was a little stumble in the engine that I felt more than heard. Just a hiccup, like it missed a beat. The old Ford had a lot of miles, so I didn't panic right away. I let off the gas a touch, listened, and felt for any vibration in the wheel. It smoothed out again, so I figured it was just bad gas or the wind messing with the load. A few minutes later, we hit the turnoff onto a narrower gravel road that cut deeper toward the forest. From there, my plan was to take a short 2-track that came back out closer to the highway. I'd run it before in better weather, and aside from some ruts and mud holes, it was nothing the truck couldn't handle. Kelly didn't love that idea. She never does when I turn onto roads that look more like trails. "Do we have to go this way?" she asked, looking out the window at the trees closing in. "It's fine," I said. "I know where this comes out. Saves us 10-15 minutes. I'll take it slow." In retrospect, I really should have listened to her. Dogman aside, Going in there at that time of night with a truck in that condition was just plain stupid. Anyway, we rolled on. The trees came in closer, branches overhanging, the beams catching bits of bark and brush. The truck stumbled again, harder this time. The dash lights flickered for a second, then came back on. "Did you feel that?" Kelly asked. "Yeah," I said. "Probably the fuel pump acting up. It's been making noise." I tried to keep my voice calm. The last thing I wanted was for her to start worrying. We reached the turn for the two-track, a narrow cut with grass down the middle and deeper ruts on both sides. I eased the truck into it, staying in 4 high just in case. The lights reached only a little way ahead before the track dipped and rose again, throwing shadows all over the place. No houses, no yard lights, no other vehicles. Just us, the truck, and a lot of dark. We'd maybe gone a couple 100 yards down that track when the engine finally gave up, pretending everything was okay. It coughed once and then just fell on its face. The power steering went next, the dash lights dimmed, and we rolled forward on momentum while I tried to feather the gas pedal and bring it back. Kelly's voice went tight as the truck died under us, and she looked over at me, clearly unsettled and trying to figure out what was going on. I popped it into neutral, twisted the key, and got nothing but a half-hearted crank and a click. The truck shuddered, then went still. The only light left was the dim glow from the dashboard and the beam of the headlights reaching into the trees ahead of us. We came to a stop right there in the ruts. No cell signal, no other vehicles, no houses within sight, just a dead truck and a lot of woods. I let out a breath and tried to talk myself down, telling myself it was probably just a loose connection or that fuel pump finally throwing a tantrum. Next to me, Kelly pulled the blanket up over her mouth and watched me with her eyes over the edge, clearly hoping I knew what I was doing and that I could get us moving again. "I'll figure something out," I said. "Stay in the truck. It's cold out there, and I don't want you standing around while I'm digging in the engine bay." She didn't argue with that. The cold hit me as soon as I stepped down into the ruts. The kind of cold that goes straight through your jeans when the wind catches it. At that point, all I was worried about was getting the truck moving again, so we wouldn't have to hike the 7 miles back to town in this weather. I walked around to the front, lifted the hood, and leaned over the engine in the wash of my own headlights, thinking about fuel lines and battery terminals. I had no idea yet that the real problem that night wasn't under the hood at all. I ran my eyes over the battery cables, the main fuse block, anything that could have shaken loose on that rough stretch of dirt. With the engine quiet, all I could hear was the tick of cooling metal and the wind working its way through the trees on both sides of the track. From where I was standing, bent over with my hands on the core support, the rest of the world narrowed down to hoses, wires, and the small circle of light I was working in. I jiggled the cables, checked the clamps, ran my fingers along the main harness where it crossed the fan shroud, going over the same spots more than once. Everything looked dirty but solid. I'd been bent over that engine for a few minutes by then, reaching in deeper to get to the fuel pump relay and just starting to talk myself into trying to jump it when, out of nowhere, the horn went off. It wasn't a little tap. It was a full blast, sudden and hard enough at that range that it shot straight through my skull and dropped my stomach into my boots. For a split second, I thought I'd leaned on it somehow. I jerked up, smacked the underside of the hood with the top of my head, and staggered back out of the engine bay with my ears ringing. The horn kept sounding in short, ragged bursts. With my ears still ringing and the wind picking up, I couldn't hear anything from inside, just the horn blaring and a frantic, muffled thumping that didn't make sense to me at first. I stepped around the front right corner of the truck to see what was going on with Kelly. Her silhouette jerked around behind the windshield, blanket flying, enough motion that it was obvious she was coming apart over something. What exactly, I had no idea of. I was about to open the passenger door to ask her if she was okay when I saw her pointing at something. At first, I thought she was pointing at me, but then I realized that her finger was a bit too far to my left. Her mouth was open like she was yelling, but I was just confused. She wasn't looking at me either. Her head was cocked to the side as if she was trying to look around me, her other hand still pressed down on that damn horn. It took me a moment to react. I turned to my left to follow her hand. There was something standing in the ditch, just off the road, just out of the tree line. It was only 20, maybe 30 feet away at most. For a second, I had no idea what I was looking at. My brain tried to make it into a man in a hooded coat, or a bear up on its back legs. Then it took a step closer, and the whole outline came together in a way that knocked the air right out of me. What I saw standing there wasn't a human being or any animal I'd ever seen in the woods. It was a horrible mix of both, like somebody had taken a big man and a big wolf and forced them together until neither one was right anymore, then left it that way. The first thing that hit me was the size, but not in some cartoon bodybuilder way. I'm a decent-sized guy at 6 foot even, and this thing was maybe a foot and a half taller, with the kind of bulk you see on a big farm worker or a football lineman who's carrying a little extra weight on top of a lot of strength. It was up on its hind legs, like that was something it could do when it wanted, not wobbling, but there was a slight set to the hips and knees that made me think it wasn't really built to walk upright. The chest and upper body read almost human at a glance. Broad rib cage, shoulders wider, upper arms and forearms that looked thick and solid rather than cut, but the covering over all of it was wrong. It stood on the outer edge of the headlight beam. I could see a tough, gray-brown hide where the fur was thin, with rough, dark hair growing thicker over the shoulders, back, and the outside of the arms, then thinning down toward the stomach and the inside of the limbs like a dog that had shed out unevenly. The legs were bent back in that dog kind of way, with long upper thighs and a noticeable hock joint set behind. But the feet didn't match anything I'd ever seen. They looked like long, ugly human feet that had been stretched and twisted toward paws, lengthened mid-foot, toes spread wider apart, nails grown into thick, blunt hooks. Up top, the arms hung a little too long for a person, and whatever sat at the ends of them wasn't paws either. They were hands of a sort, broad palms, long fingers, joints in the places you'd expect on a human hand. But the fingers ended in hard, black nails that were past normal claw length, like they'd been allowed to grow out and harden. The overall effect wasn't some comic book monster flexing for the camera. It looked more like a heavy, working man frame that had been pushed in the direction of a dog without ever fully getting there. The head was what really set it apart from anything I knew. At a quick glance, it registered as a big shepherd or wolf head stuck on the body, but the longer I stared, the less that fit. The skull seemed a bit too big for the neck, wider at the cheeks than it should have been, with a massive brow ridge over the eyes that you don't see on either dog or human. The muzzle was there, a clear snout with a black nose, but it looked a shade too short and too deep front to back, like somebody had compacted it for more bite force and heavier chewing, or it just hadn't grown out properly. There was extra thickness through the jaws, and when it moved its mouth, I caught little pulls in the skin at the corners that looked uncomfortably close to human expressions, the kind you see when someone is about to say something they shouldn't. Its mouth was open just enough for me to pick out teeth that didn't all belong in the same animal, longer canines like a dog, mixed in with blockier teeth that reminded me more of a person's molars that had been chipped or worn down. There was fresh shine on them that could have been spit or something else. The eyes didn't glow on their own, but they threw back a flat, yellow-white reflection, exactly the way you'd expect from a predator adapted to low light. For some reason, that detail hit harder than anything else, because it drove home that this wasn't a mask or some trick of shadows. It was real muscle, bone, and hide standing there in the ditch, a predator through and through. And I was out in front of a dead truck with no weapon, and nothing between us but a few yards of cold air. That's when shock turned into fear. I found myself easing backward without deciding to, working my way along the passenger side of the truck toward the rear bumper, trying not to trip in the holes while I kept my eyes on it. The dogman didn't stay still for long. After a few seconds of sizing me up, it started to move too. Not a rush or a charge, just a steady, confident walk in my direction, like it had made up its mind to close the gap and find out what exactly I was made of. In the corner of my vision, I could see Kelly's shape thrashing inside the cab. She'd dropped the blanket entirely and was forcing herself across the center console toward the driver's side, hands scrambling for something solid to grab while that thing's huge frame closed in on her door. The frantic movement inside must have caught its attention. As it came up, even with the passenger door, it turned its head away from me and lowered itself, shoulders hunching as it leaned in to look through the glass. Seeing it bend down like that to peer into my truck did something ugly to my insides. My girlfriend was inside, helpless, with nowhere to go. For a second, I had a picture in my head of it, putting one of those huge hands through the window and dragging her out. I don't remember making a plan. I just heard myself yelling. I started screaming at it, waving my arms over my head like an idiot and taking a couple of steps toward the front of the bed to pull its attention off the cab. It worked. The head snapped back around toward me, ears pricking, and the growls began. It left the side of the truck and followed me toward the rear corner instead. I backed up again, eager to put as much metal between it and me as I could. Not that that would have made a difference if it really came for me. I kept backing up along the tailgate, then around the back of the truck, trying to keep the bed between us while my brain ran in circles. I could have climbed into the back seat if I'd made a sprint for the rear door, but I couldn't shake the thought of those hands tearing into the cab, and then it being on both of us instead of just me. I needed something to fight with. The only thing back in the bed was a red plastic gas can I kept strapped to the rear of the cab for the mower. My eyes hit it without really meaning to. The strap was right there at my shoulder. In pure panic, I pulled it free. The can dropped into my hands, sloshing heavily, maybe half full. I didn't think about fumes or anything else. I just swung and threw it as hard as I could at the dark shape coming around the corner. Somehow, more by luck than skill, it caught the thing square across the face and upper chest. It reeled back a step with a sharp, chopped-off sound, head snapping to the side, one hand coming up to its muzzle. For a couple of seconds, it was off balance, shaking its head like a dog that's had something thrown in its eyes. That was all the opening I got. I used it to scramble a few yards farther away and past the open hood. Standing out there in the dark, with my breath coming short and my brain scrambling for a solution that just wouldn't come, I made a different kind of decision. I figured if it was going to pick one of us, I'd rather it be me. If I could drag it far enough away from Kelly for her to get her head on straight, maybe it would forget about her and spend the rest of the night feasting on me. I know how that sounds, but that's exactly what I pictured in that moment. So I kept moving, angling past the front of the truck and out toward the shoulder, yelling and clapping and doing anything I could think of to make myself loud and obvious. It followed. Once it shook off the hit from the gas can, it came on again, eyes completely locked on me. The distance between us stayed about the same, 15, 20 feet, as we drifted away from the truck, me in reverse and it walking forward. By the time I'd worked myself about 30 feet out from the front bumper, the truck was off to my left, and the thing was roughly halfway between us. I was out of ideas. In that moment, I was certain that I was finished, and that it would tear into me any second. Then a shot went off. The crack of it right there on top of me was like getting slapped in the side of the head. I flinched hard, shoulders coming up, one foot slipping back in the mud. For half a second, I had no idea what had just happened. The Dogman jerked like somebody had yanked a cable through its upper body. It snapped forward a half step, twisted, and then let out a noise that didn't sound like anything I'd heard in the woods before. A broken, rising howl that started in a dog range but picked up something rough and torn in the middle of it, half pain and half pure anger. It staggered sideways, one hand trying to claw at something on its back. It took me a moment to catch up. My brain tried to assign the shot to some stranger out in the trees, another driver, a hunter, a landowner, anybody but the one person I knew was close enough to have pulled a trigger. I turned my head toward the truck and saw Kelly. She was out of the cab now, half behind the open driver's door, shoulders hunched, both hands wrapped around something black in front of her. For a moment, it didn't register. Then I recognized the outline of my pistol in her grip. She was holding my gun, the same 9mm I was sure I'd put back in my safe over a month ago. I'd gotten into the habit of leaving it in places that were out of sight and out of mind more and more, since Kelly made it clear she hated having it around. Half the time, If I had it on me and was meeting her, I'd shove it under the passenger seat or into the console to keep the peace, telling myself I'd sort it out later. Somewhere along the line, I'd convinced myself I really had taken it back into the house for good. I hadn't even factored it into any plan because, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't in the truck and hadn't been for weeks. Kelly's arms were trembling so hard, I could see it even at that distance. The slide was back in battery. She was trying to line up on the thing again, eyes wide and wet, jaw clenched like she was holding back a scream. Kelly doesn't know guns. Once, maybe a year before all this, I'd tried to show her how mine worked, how to drop the mag, rack the slide, and undo the safety. She'd rolled her eyes and told me she didn't want anything to do with it. I figured none of it stuck. Standing there in the road with the dogman howling and screaming, I realized she must have remembered more than either of us thought. She fired again before I could yell anything. The second shot went wide of the animal and snapped past me close enough that I heard the whistle of it in the air and felt my whole spine try to curl away from it. I ducked out of reflex, half turning and throwing a hand up like that would do anything, a curse ripping out of me before I could stop it. Behind me, I heard Kelly let out a sharp, pained sound. Not fear this time, but the kind of noise you make when you bang your hand with a hammer. She'd underestimated the recoil and the way the gun would jump in her hands. The dogman didn't wait around to see if there'd be a third round. As soon as that second shot cracked past, it dropped to all fours in one quick, ugly motion and scrambled for the tree line on the driver's side. The change from upright to quadruped was anything but smooth. Its back bent, head low, feet and hands digging for purchase. Gravel and dirt sprayed out behind it as it bolted into the brush, almost running sideways like an ape, then crashing through undergrowth until the sound faded into the general noise of the wind in the trees. I didn't chase it. The second it took off, I turned and ran the other way, straight for Kelly. She was still standing there behind the door, arms lowered now, the pistol hanging in both hands like it weighed 50 pounds. Her face was white, eyes unfocused, chest heaving under the hoodie. I grabbed the gun out of her grip before she could say anything, thumbed my finger clear of the trigger guard out of habit, and brought it up toward the trees where the thing had disappeared, fully expecting it to whirl around and come back at us. Nothing moved out there except branches. For over a minute, I just stood there, shaking with the gun aimed at nothing, waiting for a set of eyes to appear between the branches. Kelly was making her way back to her side around the front of the truck, crying nonstop. We didn't stand out there in the open any longer than we had to. A few seconds later, we climbed into the cab, slammed the doors, and locked everything. Only then did I let the gun come down. Hiking out in the middle of the night stopped being an option the second that thing showed itself. 7 miles on back roads in that wind, with something like that roaming around, wasn't a risk I was willing to take, even armed. We talked it through in short, shaky sentences, and ended up with one plan that made sense: stay put in the truck and wait for daylight. If the engine didn't start in the morning, we'd walk out then. Those were some of the longest hours I've ever sat through. The heater was dead with the motor, so we killed the headlights to save what was left of the battery and bundled up as best we could. Kelly curled up in the corner with the blanket pulled over her shoulders, still crying on and off, hands jammed under her arms to keep them from shaking so badly. I sat there in the driver's seat with the pistol across my lap, watching the tree line all night. At one point, maybe an hour or two in, I couldn't tell you exactly when, I thought I saw something move between the trunks on my side. Just a darker shape against the dark, low and slow. My heart spiked hard enough that I felt sick. I rolled the window down an inch, brought the pistol up, and snapped off 2 rounds into the brush where I thought I'd seen it. The muzzle flash lit up a patch of trees for a heartbeat, and then it was just dark and ringing ears again. Nothing screamed, except for Kelly. Nothing howled. To this day, I don't know if there was something out there, or if I was jumping at shadows. We waited until there was enough daylight to see the ditch and the track clearly. The truck still wouldn't turn over, so we started walking to the main road, gun out and ready the whole time. In daylight, the place looked like any other dirt road. Ruts, mud, pockets of brush where the ditch widened out. No obvious blood trail, no fur hanging off branches, nothing to mark where that thing had bailed into the woods. If you didn't know what you were looking for, you'd never guess anything had happened there, besides a truck breaking down. We made it back to the main road without seeing so much as a squirrel. A farmer in a beat-up Chevy eventually slowed down and gave us a ride into town. I told him the truck had quit and left it at that. I had the Ford towed out later that day. Nothing showed itself. 2 days later, a buddy of mine mentioned he was getting rid of his pickup, and I bought it off him as fast as I could get the cash together. I never did trust that old truck again, and I sure as hell never drove it back into those woods. Kelly's attitude toward guns has done a full 180 since that night. What happened out there scared and shook her, but it flipped a switch too, having me teach her everything: how to load, unload, clear a jam, how to shoot without flinching, became her way of coping with it. We started going out to the range together on weekends when we could, burning through boxes of ammo, watching her groups tighten up shot by shot. She's got a Glock of her own now, in a little safe under the bed at her place, and she always carries it when we're out. Somehow, as messed up as the whole thing was, it turned into a bonding thing for us. We don't talk about that night all the time, but it's there between us, and she knows exactly what she did for me. I'm still struggling with the memories of that Dogman, or whatever you want to call it. I can go days without thinking about it, and then some random noise outside at night or a shape on the side of the road will bring it all back up. We haven't seen it again since, but one of my work buddies mentioned, a few weeks after, that a friend of his swore he'd put down some kind of weird dog in roughly the same area, said it was big and wrong in a way he couldn't quite explain. My buddy is an idiot and a drunk, and so are most of the people he runs with. Everybody on site laughed it off. Everybody except me. If you take anything from this, let it be this: don't let your girlfriend, your friends, or anybody else talk you out of carrying. If you're going to be out in the middle of nowhere, especially at night, bring something to defend yourself with and know how to use it. I almost died out there unarmed because I wanted to keep the peace. If Kelly hadn't dug that pistol out from under the seat and figured it out under pressure, I wouldn't be writing this. Stay protected. Stay safe.